Greetings, groovy geographers, and welcome back. Today we are talking about gender identity and gendered spaces. So I've split up the lectures on gender from sexual orientation because they are two different things. People of all genders can have all different sexual orientations. And the ways that folks use the landscape may be different depending on gender and sexual orientation. So this lecture is just looking at gender identity and gendered spaces. We talk about how genders use space. So how does gender impact movement through space? So again, I am a cisgender woman. So one of the things that I think about quite a bit when I move through space is it safe for me in terms of harm to my physical body? And so, trigger warning, talk about sexual assault. Many women, both cis and trans, fear for their personal safety when they are walking alone at night or going to get their parking lot after night class or whatnot. And so I remember when I was either in junior high or high school, I can't remember which. They did that thing in PE where they split all the girls and boys into different rooms and the boys went and played football or something. I remember my PE teacher had all the girls, we had to open up her backpack, and she said, I want you to go through your backpack and list anything that you could use as a weapon to defend yourself. And this is something that was taught in my school. And so at a pretty young age, high school, junior high, it already was impressed upon me by an educator, by a teacher, that I should prepare myself to physically defend my body from other people, usually male, not always, but usually male. And so, we look at, there's of course really terrible statistics about violence against women. And so that impacts how women move through space. And again, the violence against trans women is again that intersectionality of not just gender but gender identity as well, because trans women are women. That intersection of multiple identities, and so that impacts women who park next to streetlights, or women who don't take night classes, or women who always walk with their keys clenched between their fingers. These are ways that women have to navigate space that a man may never have thought of, or a masculine presenting person may never have thought of. Right? And then so the same way that women may be moving through space through fear, then their men might be moving through space concerned about how people perceive them. This especially is true for men of color who might be walking through a space and worry, are people going to perceive me as a threat when I'm just walking into my car or walking home from class? Do people see me and my body and assume, oh, he's going to cause trouble? Again, that intersectionality of gender and race, ethnicity, and how that allows us to move through space. There is a book called Whistling Vivaldi that was written by an African-American man who talks about, this African-American man talks about how he would be walking and people would, grab their purse and be afraid. And he would whistle Vivaldi. That's a classical concerto or something. And that was his signal to them of like, look, I know classical music. I'm not here to rob you, because that people were afraid of him in that space. And so that impacted how he was able to move through space. So when we think about, folks moving through spaces, some spaces are specifically already predetermined to be for a specific gender. Gendered is when a place is deemed to be for men or for women. There really are not non-binary spaces. There are, especially again here in the Bay Area, there are safe spaces that are for LGBTQ folks, which would include non-binary folks. But there are very few public spaces that are specifically deemed to be for non-binary or third-gendered people. But there are lots of places that are specifically for men or specifically for women. In fact, this is going to be your second selfie field trip, is find a gendered place. And so you think about, places that are specifically for women. So we think the markers for that. So the color pink is always a dead giveaway for men, for girls. You can even think about going to a toy section at Target or, Walmart, and the overload of pink tells you, okay, I know what gender these toys are aimed for. But things like beauty salons and nail salons, again, more and more men and non-binary folks are going to nail in hair salons, but for a long time, those were just female spaces, right? And then also in the flip side, you can have a barber shop, which are predominantly for males. Now, you do have women and non-binary folks who go to barber shops, especially if they like their hairstyle a certain way, but predominantly a barber shop would be considered a male space versus a beauty salon would be considered a female space. We've got this lovely picture here of a kitchen, because a woman's place is in the home, right? So if you think about cooking spaces, baking spaces are often predetermined to be the woman's space. So in how many homes is it the woman who does the cooking or the woman who provides the meals? But yet when we get into the corporate space, if we look at professional chefs, many professional chefs are male. It is again changing, but for a long time it was men who would be the chefs in making the money. But if it was just for cooking for the kids, that was the woman's job. So look about you and think about what are some things that tells you that a space is gendered for man or woman. I wanted to have a picture of a gentleman's club, but most of the pictures are not appropriate for class. But there are things, certain, signs that you might have or pictures you might have. Usually the presence of beer and alcohol is going to be a signal of this is a man's space. Sports clubs, or might be a man's space. So to think about what kind of things, the posters on the wall, types of music, color schemes you might see that might be, coding for how, or I should say what genders are, allowed to be there, quote unquote. And this is different than bathrooms, right? Because a bathroom is not a gendered space, but it is, right? So again, Skyline College, we have many unisex bathrooms, or we have single stall open to anyone bathrooms, because that eliminates the problem. Because if you have to go pee, but you see this picture here and you're like, well, which one do I use? Suddenly the simple act of going to the bathroom is just a heart-wrenching decision. So yeah, at Skyline College, we have unisex bathrooms and we have single stall restrooms. There are some colleges and there are some places that all bathrooms are unisex, even if they are multi-stalled. I know UC Berkeley has that. Plenty of restaurants I've been to, there's one bathroom and they all have stalls. And you all go there because that's what you're there to do. You take care of your business and you go. But this is a big thing, and it impacts. I don't think the weight can be emphasized of how much this very basic human function of going to the bathroom can have such an emotional toll on folks who worry about being harassed if they go into the bathroom, who worry about being judged if they go into the bathroom, who worry about people being violent if they go into the bathroom, when they're really just there to go pee and go about their business. So I want to touch on third gender, which is something that many cultures have. Again, you're starting to hear the term non-binary quite often. And I do want to emphasize that many cultures have more than 3 genders. But the broad term of third gender is referring to someone who is not a man or a woman. Okay, so again, we hear the term non-binary. Two-spirit, we'll talk more about in a bit. Intersex, again, so folks who may have been born with ambiguous genitalia, or they may have chromosomes that don't match XXXY. They could be XXY, they could be XXX. You can have one X actually too, now that I think about it. They may, if they know that their chromosomal makeup is that, they might say, yeah, I'm not a man or woman. I'm a third gender. Hijra is, these folks here are in India. And there are many different pronouns that folks can use. Again, pronouns are in a very personal, it's a personal choice. So you may hear folks use the term they, them, z or here. These are some of the more common pronouns used by folks who are third gender or non-binary. In Great Britain, when you register for male, they ask you to put Mr., Miss, Ms., Mrs., Doctor, but you also now can put mix. And that is MX, so mix. So you would say, I am Ms. Rachel Cunningham, but someone who is third gender could be mix John Jones or whatever, So that would be the address for addressing someone. And again, this is something found all over the world. And there's some videos. There's a video from Mexico on your on your Canvas page, there's a video on Two-Spirit folks. So Two-Spirit folks, and this is specifically referring to Native Americans, the people who live on Turtle Island, which is what is now commonly referred to as North America. There was Turtle Island before that, before colonization, I should say. So again, Native American tribes are not a monolith. There are many different cultures and many different nations within that umbrella of indigenous cultures. So Two-Spirit is a newer phrase used to put a modern, I should say, colonial term to something that existed in many cultures on Turtle Island pre-colonization, pre-European interference. So depending on the nation, people who are Two-Spirit could work, had work and society roles that could be male or female or both. So for example, they could do hunting or basket weaving or healing, depending again on their individual tribe. But Two-Spirit folks, again, and each tribe would have their own term for it. This is where we see some blending, again, depending on its specific tribe, some blending between gender and sexuality, because folks who are gay or lesbian or bisexual might also be termed Two-Spirit, even if they are what we might, well, I should say what Western culture might say cis. So sometimes when you see the 2 on the LGBTQ, you put a 2, that stands for Two-Spirit people. And this is an unfortunate example of one more thing that European colonization erased when it came to North America, is the Christian European standards of gender roles from the Spanish and the British and the Portuguese and the French were very much forced upon indigenous peoples. And you had to either be a man or a woman. And if you were a man, you had to marry a woman. If you're a woman, you had to marry a man. There was nothing else, no other options allowed. Again, especially in the very strong influence of the church system in colonization and the mission system, especially here in California. So Two-Spirit people were punished, and they had to hide their identity. Some of them were killed, and that was something that was discouraged being practiced. That reality was discouraged. In the 1990s, I believe, the term Two-Spirit was created to have an umbrella term for all the different tribes have their own terms for these people. Because again, there's more than just, it's some tribes have 4 different categories of Two-Spirit folks. It really depends on your individual culture. But I just wanted to illustrate examples of how non-binary is not a new thing. You know, there's a lot of accusations that transgender, non-binary are just a hip fad, but it's not at all. In fact, we see them in cultures all over the world. There are also examples of sub-Saharan Africa of Two-Spirit people. They wouldn't be called Two-Spirit there, but again, something that we saw in Polynesian countries. There were people who had a Two-Spirit type role in their society. We see them all over the world. So talking again about bathrooms, and so I found this interesting because again, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and so more and more places are allowing bathrooms to be open for everyone, unlike Kentucky, where they're really strict about it and rude about it. So you may have seen some of these signs here that we're trying to be funny, but can still be problematic. And so someone, you might see something like this, where we have the half pants and half dress. And I think it's trying to be like, look, there's 3 genders. There's male, there's female, and there's in between, which is not what non-binary is. Some people who are non-binary may be in between. Some people who are non-binary may be both. Some people who are non-binary might be neither, right? It really depends on the individual person, you know? And so this can be problematic because it's like saying that bisexual people are 50% into men, 50% into women. That's also not true, right? Then you have people getting kind of funny, like, let's have some aliens and mermaids, and now it's like, okay, cool. So you're basically saying that I'm as weird as a mermaid, thanks. And then people start to get funny and awkward, and it's just like, this is not nice. Versus like, what is the purpose of me being here? I'm here to do a very specific purpose, right? So words matter. And so things like this might sound funny, but they also they send a message to people. They send a message to folks about whether or not they belong. And so these are ways that humans put signs and markers in spaces, in places that tells folks who might be gender non-conforming, non-binary, transgender, that either they don't belong or their presence is funny or, a burden. And so yeah, just something to be conscious of there. So as you know, part of this class requires you to have a map exercise, and your very first map exercise will come with this gender lecture. So your job is to make a map that discusses some type of gender topic. I will have more for you, an actual grading prompt for that. But we're going to have some examples of some maps for you to kind of just get your brain thinking. And also while I talk about gender and geography. So in many parts of the world, power is not evenly distributed between men and women, let alone non-binary and third gender folks. Again, so as I talk about the rest of these slides, unfortunately, most international data doesn't even allow for the option to collect information on non-binary and third gender folks. So they're just completely left out, a lot of these census informations. So this map here is showing gender inequality index. And again, there's lots of different things that go into, rating inequality. So things like ability to own land, ability to vote, ability to, pay for jobs, control over reproduction. Lots of different things go into gender inequality. You can kind of see here the places where we have the most equalities, going, quote unquote. It's going to be, apparently Australia and parts of Europe and parts of Canada. And then you see parts that we have the high inequality might be parts of Southeast Asia, South Asia, Southwest Asia, parts of Africa, parts of South America and Central America. And there can be many different reasons for this, right? This could be related to religion. So depending on some religions are interpreted in ways, again, the religion itself isn't unequal, but they are interpreted as being unequal. And so there might be different patriarchal nuances that are forced upon women and men in those parts of the world. It could be economical, and also colonialism very much has patriarchy embedded in it. A lot of the colonialization of European powers to other parts of the world was done with a very male-dominated dialogue. So if we look, this is of 2015, so it's a little bit old, but still relevant. As of 2015, only 2 countries in the entire world had national legislatures that were more than half female. Rwanda and Bolivia. So we've got a country in Africa, and we have a country in South America. And so when we look at this map here, and folks say, oh no, Africa and South America are not even. Actually, the only 2 countries that have more than half the legislation being female. So that just, I include this number 1 we need to work on increasing the number of countries that have more women in legislation. The US had 23.7% in 2020. So that's great. At least we now have a female vice president, but we still have work to do. And also just to talk about a lot of the preconceived notions we have about parts of the world and stereotypes we have about parts of the world. The first country in the world to have a female head of state was a Muslim country. And so if folks may have, biases and prejudice against Muslim countries based on their misunderstanding of Islam, forget that the first female head of state was a Muslim country. So it's Benazir Bhutto. And parts of the world that are considered quote unquote equal actually are not at all. Not at all, right? So another part of gender and power, so in addition to things like, voting and driving and jobs, a lot of that is going to be reproductive health. And this isn't just things like access to things like abortions, but just access to, do they decide when and if they have babies? Do they decide when and if they have sex? And that's when we're talking about reproductive health. And so if women can't control when and if they want to have sex, when and if they want to have children, they're more vulnerable to things like sexually transmitted diseases, because if they don't have control over when they have sex, they probably don't have control over whether or not that protection is used. Parts of the world that don't allow women to have agency over their reproductive health probably don't have things like condoms that are readily available, or easy to get a hold of, or with directions on how to use them. You think about it, if you'd never learned how to use a condom, that's not something that you're born knowing how to do. Some sex ed classes have you practice it, but many don't. And then also concerns with childbirth and pregnancy. So not just, children are lovely, but they do have, it takes a lot of energy and finances to raise them. But also, medically speaking, women who have lots of children very closely spaced together, this can be a toll on their body physically. And I mean, like, lots of children close together can actually have some health concerns for the mother and for the baby. And of course, there are many health concerns that come with pregnancy just in general. So there are health issues related to women not having that just power over their own physical bodies. There are also economic issues. And so there are some countries that women cannot own land. Everything they own belongs to their husband or their father or their son. These are countries where women could not have wives. Some countries prohibit women from taking out bank loans, right? So therefore, they don't have access to processes of making income, control over modes of economy. But in many less developed countries, so these are countries that might have more of an agricultural emphasis, women account for half of the food production. So women are doing the physical labor of working in the fields and tending the animals and tending the crops, but they're not allowed to have the monetary benefit from it. So they're doing the labor, but not the monetary benefit and the monetary power, because that's who ultimately has the control, is who has the cash and who has the land. So this brings up something called the informal economy. So an informal economy are tasks that are not counted toward a country's income or their gross domestic product, GDP. So if you think about, if you've ever done something like mowed your neighbor's lawn and they gave you $5 cash, or you babysat your cousins and you got, $10 for it, or maybe you weren't given cash, but they bought you dinner or something, you don't fill out a tax form for that, right? These are things that they're informal because they're still crucial, right? Your cousins need to have someone care for their child, and your neighbor needs to get their lawn mowed, but that exchange of money or services does not count officially in terms of the country's gross domestic products. Often these are again related to women's work. So things like childcare. It was one of my first jobs when I was a kid, is I did the child daycare at the local gym, and I got like $2 per kid. Like, I did not file taxes when I was 12 years old, right? But it was a way for me to earn some money, and I just watched some kids for a while. Cleaning, or cooking. So a lot of these things that are crucial parts of making society function, but because there might not be cash involved, so maybe it's, again, exchanging services. So if you've heard the term a time bank, so something like, I will, if you help me cook dinner, I will help you with your Spanish homework, or something like that. So it's an exchange of services. That these then don't get counted as part of the GDP. So it then becomes invisible, because a lot of power on the international economic stage is who makes the most money. And so when any international finance or international business is looking at markets, they want to know what companies have the cash, or what countries have the cash. If a country on paper doesn't have cash, then they're looked down upon and not given enough power on the global economic stage, when they're still very much functioning. Just that economy is informal, and it's often, again, related to women's work. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much and take care.